I'd like to welcome you to this introductory video on the history and the historiography of the jet engine and its impact on the military and civil societies that have benefited from its use. While 1903 is noted as the birth of aviation through the first flight of the Wright brothers on December 17, 1903, the Wrights kept their aircraft essentially under wraps and secretive until they signed a US and then later French contract to deliver aircraft to their respective militaries. For the US, the first plane was formally accepted by the US Army Signal Corps, they had nowhere else to place it, in August of 1909. For all intent and purposes, that is the date of the start of the air age. As part of that contract, the Wright had to train a cadre of Army officers to fly, which they did, and those officers formed the core of the original United States Air Force. Nearly coincident with this timing, in 1910, French inventor Georges Marconi received a French patent for the design of an engine that could power a device with a high-speed, high-temperature exhaust out the back. In principle, though this engine was never built and was not a fully functional jet, the principle of jet propulsion was now on the table. The turbine engine concept was further refined in 1921 by an additional French patent granted to Maxime Guillaume, again demonstrating the power of rear thrust, but also not a fully functional engine. At this point, we should go back in time about 2,000 years to Alexandria, Egypt, where an obscure inventor whose name was Hero actually built and demonstrated what would be considered the world's first turbine, as demonstrated by the short clip of a reconstruction of the device. Rotary turbine engines then remained in total obscurity until the introduction of the airplane. And it continued development into a structure capable of such an engine. These factors began to come together in the late 1930s. Aided by British Air Force pilot and inventor Frank Whittle, who filed a patent granted in Britain in 1932 that resulted in an actual working engine several years later, after finding financing and people to build it, and after co-inventor Hans von Obein filed a similar but unrelated patent in Germany in 1936. Both Britain and Germany were working on laboratory models of their respective designs, and while the first test aircraft with a working jet engine flew in wartime Germany in 1941, the first actual production jet-powered aircraft, the Messerschmitt Me-262, was put into production in 1944. It is truly amazing how the pressures of war could galvanize the advancement of technology and innovation. And this was a prime example of that. Before proceeding, it may be illuminating to view the inside of a jet engine working. Fortunately, a YouTube provider generated just such a preview, and a short clip of that video is embedded here. Take a look. It is really interesting to note that the design and concept of a working jet are deceptively simple. Essentially, there is one moving part, the central rotor, which is connected from the front of the engine in order to compress air to mix with fuel and create energy, and the rear section of that same rotor, which sits in the burning fuel-air mixture and receives the power to turn the front portion. These exhaust gases, which are then forced out the back to generate the thrust needed to propel the aircraft. It is deceptively simple. The details are in the materials and manufacturing accuracy needed to make the engine extremely efficient. Also during World War II, the British-designed engine by Whittle was provided to the United States, who in turn gave it to the General Electric Company, who at the time were the most experienced manufacturers of high temperature turbines and superchargers for propeller-driven piston airplanes. And they were selected in 1942 to build a US copy of the British Whittle engine. The wartime story of that development, along with the level of secrecy enforced, presented in a GE video on YouTube, as well as a web-based chronicle of that development and some of the people involved, who noted that they were told if they shared any of the secrets at the time, they would be shot. Interesting side story. After the war, jet engine development was a top priority by the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain. It was also aided by the export of the German engineers that built the Me-262 into the various respective countries, particularly the US. As the future of jet-based travel was already forming in those who understood the potential wrought and brought by jet propulsion as compared with piston-powered, propeller-driven aircraft, it was realized early on that the jet represented the most significant advance in aircraft technology since the introduction of the airplane itself. As noted by historian Charles Bright, an author who has written extensively about the aviation changes in the early jet age, quote, dominating all other facts of jet influence on design has been the geometric increase in unit productivity of aircraft. The jet's greatly increased power to weight ratio resulted in such improved distance, time, and payload performance that the airplane has far greater economic and military usefulness than ever before, unquote. Here Bright is concentrating on the technical as well as economic aspects of the jet engine as it transformed both the military operations and civil transportation and travel around the world. It's most interesting to note at this point that the difference between jet-powered aircraft and piston propeller-powered is not simply a small advance in capability. As my author Edward Constant in a 1973 journal article, quote, this is a paradigmatic revolution and is exemplified in this article by the shift from propeller-driven to jet-propelled aircraft. Here he is stating that in his belief, the introduction of jet power to the industry was a paradigm shift in technology, not simply an incremental improvement. It represented an entire different set of capabilities of aviation technology and operations. As author Graham Hoyland summarizes the impact of the jet engine in his recently released book, Jet, the Engine That Changed the World, simply by noting the words and implications of the title of the book, in which he traces notable jumps in technical innovation over the history of the jet. To summarize a GE article as noted earlier, the initial World War II era GE jet engine, which powered the entire first generation of US military as well as civilian aircraft, generated 1,700 pounds of forward thrust and had a service life of 500 hours between major overhauls or checks. GE's current largest engine, just for comparison, which is also the largest that exists to date, can generate up to 134,000 pounds of thrust and has a recommended service life between major checks of 15,000 hours. The jet engine is now ingrained into the world's military and transport segments, so much so that they essentially blend into the background environment. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in another video soon. Thank you.